and welcome to Liminal Light, a show that explores the languages of myth and star, earth, sky, tongue, and spirit through weekly astrological forecasts. I'm your host, Chris. Enjoy. Overtones churn as decaying and distorted tones crush each other and suppress sounds sustaining on rails of grinding and squealing metallic song. Like the strings and sirens of scrapyards, tank treads crossing alternating colors and square-set patterns of ivory and jet. Or if you look deep enough and can find a torch to take down, you might find that what seemed black was in fact deep jade. Worry stones carried by giants whose oils entered and infused long ago in wars they spent behind protective walls, pacing before their tables and positioning pieces in a game. While outside, fires lashed whole hamlets like licking, dragging tongues. Throats let souls escape, and decapitated tempests dapple and model the canvas like some wound-coated canine costume, condemned to carry the festooned flesh from charred carcass cavern to cavern, where city spires hung over ashen simulating conifers, bowed by snow. The gleaming coinage lifted by wings of bats called to the sounds of demonic geese, which hiss elsewhere unseen, as if they do not exist, instead inserted memories that found hosts while hibernating, waiting for the picture to correct, the scum to race away in the eventual rains. But even those drops that congregate beneath the tarp and drip upon the stacks of books, they melt the words within, so when we see the tear-streamed glass and drive without wiping windshields off, into futures wreathed with decorum sanctum, sordid stolen and spying on ourselves in spades. The shovels that we transport are ghosts whose graves have been upset on purpose. It's all part of the plan. Mars with the strike of strings come Sturm und Drang has entered Capricorn with Saturn, the former in exaltation and the latter in rulership. This is for many may be the silent cue which summons their ultimate antagonist to the stage, where for others, especially the wise, it is the moment you turn dangerous. Clint Eastwood gulping down whiskey at the end of Unforgiven. Your obstacles and adversaries should probably just flee now as you are no more screwing around. Either way, someone is dangerous and no longer screwing around. Is it you or is it them? This is occurring somewhere in all of our charts, and a quick glance can reveal what is being attacked, or where the hammer is going to come down from. We would do well to choose this ordeal as our own now, and start setting up our strategies to checkmate our opponents. Meanwhile, Mercury is steadily applying to Venus and Aries, finding us illustrating what we read in The Art of War. Conflict is beautiful, and we paint ourselves into the narrative. Render ourselves the focal warrior in the picture. We may aim our weapon at the viewer, or the viewer may aim their weapon at the canvas, or the frame around it threatens destruction like a set of closing jaws. The castle itself clamps down upon and digests its inhabitants, or the inhabitants detonate the kingdom from a distant hill, having set its coordinates in its crosshairs. As the museum establishment attacks the rights to hang our paintings in its galleries, we struggle as artists to build a body of work that can withstand the pressure and lift the monolith off ourselves. As in a wrestling match, we flip the Guggenheim on its belly, and holding its arm across its back, lay our likeness over its form. Or the other way around. What we are forced to do now, how we outmaneuver our enemies, and what picture of us gets painted inaugurates these final moments of the astrological year, while the sun catches up in Pisces, having touched angels' wings and Messiah's wounds along the way to spring's equinoctial gate. On Sunday, March 18th at 6:30 a.m. EST, the moon in Aries squares Saturn in Capricorn. A heavy stone burns in our bowels with the emotional fight for individuation and independence, torsion against laws of nature and of society's systems. The key is to understand which direction the gun points. People might be too individuated to relate to one another. Every man and woman is a star, but in this case, they might all consider themselves the sun. By 6 p.m., the moon conjoins Venus in an impulse to socialize and indulge in sights mouthing off and arguing, savoring the pleasures of obnoxious social clamor, feeling the wearing battle clothes and the need to indulge in edgy aesthetics, generating or creating strife for fun. Think of stir-crazy cabin cats, archetypal feline or feminine aggression. We find this upon Alpharat's degree of 14 Aries. The topics being shouted about and gnawed upon may revolve around demanding social and religious freedom of education in relation to society. Only an hour later, Luna contacts Mercury. When our logic is only as clear as our emotions, people speak their feelings. But in this case, perhaps rashly and impulsively, blurting out whatever your heart and mind might hold with no filter, sparking off heated and emotionally charged debates, or even chanting passionate slogans. Before the sun's exit, he comes across Chiron nestled near the fixed star sheet, and sees a vision of riding emotional and intuitive waves of tragedy and mystical ecstasy, which radiate and personify core wounds and lifelong trips, and how they might either be held within and contaminate the waters, or finally let flow away. Whether this is a soaked bandage or final wound washing depends on the person. On Monday, March 19th, the waxing moon then collides with Uranus at 3 p.m., creating a potential lack in concentration and discipline, inflaming the feeling of doing something else, although we could achieve impulsive moments of intuitive innovation amidst a normally disturbing and distracting few hours, all performed outwardly, as if a play you've been cast into without realizing it. The evening, at 9 p.m., the moon ingresses Taurus, achieving organic pace and natural rhythm, which will likely be much appreciated, allowing us to take the spike of epiphany from the morning and start slowly rolling out the dough, which we will bake into bread. 2 hours later, Venus conjoins Mercury, expressing love by making art and music, writing poetically, panting with hot artistic logic. We unroll our maps and plan our pleasure trips. We might even move the map onto the floor and dance on the world, or take some utensil and sketch ourselves into the topography. Staccato strokes stipulate seductive personal vortexes, of which you are at the center, singing in a signature style unique to your voice. The moon, now exalted, is trine Mars exalted, and the moon near Mirage, her organic rhythm receptively to fecundity, but acutely disturbed by the antithesis to such signatures. Harmonize with calculated action and heavy stratagem, imbuing courage and leadership abilities as the natural needs of action are understood. The way to proceed through the opponent's defenses is slowly and steadily, doing only what is necessary, having the courage to keep putting one foot before the next while advancing toward obstacles and adversaries. As with any moon transit, it will be over in a few hours, so take advantage while you can. On Tuesday, March 20th, Astrological New Year begins as the sun ingresses Aries just after noon. Light and darkness reaching balance in spring equinox, a time for new beginnings, visions of raw personal power. Where the planets are in the zodiac at this moment implies not just what happens on this day, but describes signatures that arch over the year. We may recall that the 2018 calendar year chart has the moon in rulership in Cancer opposing Saturn tightly. And here in the Aries Ingress chart, Luna trines Saturn almost exactly from exaltation in Taurus. In both cases, a dignified moon aspects Saturn in rulership, a year of what we need and what the Earth needs to be tested, restructured and stabilized on deep and foundational levels, requiring many big power moves and reorganization of the game board. As Mercury and Venus are less than a degree apart in Aries, we know these game changes will incite much art and individual expression, loud voices expressing themselves as the world around them goes through dramatic changes, like the voices of the crowd which rise up when a trophy is passed or a ballot is read in a ceremony, or something critical happens in a sporting tournament. Angrily, we demand beauty and insist on hearing our own voices or our own aesthetic logic rippling in the tumult. The cult of the individual persists, but at least art is likely to result from it. The moon is trine Saturn while she is near the stars Hamal and Shedder. The organic pace and fecund preparations practiced by strong, noble women, known for their challenges to convention, harmonized with the laws of nature and the rigid hierarchies of foundational systems, enabling the ability to withstand considerable strain and practical control of emotions. Not necessarily an easy time, but a sobering one, where the material needs of women, the world, and the earth itself are exceedingly cut and dry. On Thursday, March 22nd, Mercury stations retrograde around 8 p.m., beginning a review and reinvestigation of the details and logic of impulsive communication and the particular details of individuals and their expressions. We may ask ourselves during this period, what is my unique voice? What is my personal logic? What paradigms persist in my personal vortex? Circumstances arise to confuse us, but only as a diversion which force our focus into facing these questions if we don't look on our own. The regular array of technological upsets and travel setbacks and do-overs will of course occur while Mercury is absent. He heads into the underworld to communicate with the dead and the other spirits of Hades, a good time to search into and through materiality to find interpersonal fire and spirit within. To look below and inward to find yang mojo you might have once had and later lost but can now reclaim. On the surface, we might summon to us any lost personal item or locate links back to personal sovereignty. On Friday, March 23rd, Venus squares Pluto at 7 p.m., igniting intense and mysterious relationships, obscure sexual art, dark power pleasure, attraction and aesthetic experiences of uncommon, traumatic, and obsessive or awe-inspiring nature, being pushed through initiatory tension and perhaps transgressing out of the social structure, safe system, into the totality of the mystical divine on the other side. Truly a night for Babylon to manifest, in both temple and in boudoir, or really any place she wants. But as she is attracted to roses, blood, and bomb blasts, you might know where to go to find her, or simply invite her over for a while. We could be brought to face blind spots in personal pleasure, or aesthetic atrocities as our desires pulsate towards pleasures wildly beyond what is possible on Earth, or even in reality. At 11 a.m. Saturday, a Cancer moon opposes Capricornian Mars, and we become both emotionally excited and easily irritated around strategic actions. There's a danger here to become horribly distraught if we don't bring both emotions and basic needs in balance with larger strategies. This is the moment you might realize there's really no escape. You're in the Marines and you're shipping out tomorrow, so make sure you have everything you need. Also, it might be a time to make sure all these war games and high-stakes Monopoly are really bringing you the things that you need. You have to play. There's no changing that fact. So if you must compete, at least choose the prizes that are most crucial and most fulfilling. By noon, the newly exalted Sun squares an exalted Mars from a sign Mars rules. Ego conflicts erupt from the statues and the squares of life. The game pieces animate, take a look around and decide they have personal beef with each other based around hang-ups and trips they tote around. With any Mars or Sun aspect, and always with square aspects in general, find constructive expression and strategic outlets for energy, or end up in these dire disputes. As things may reach a fevered pitch, keep watch for health and injury. Support your immune system and avoid dangers and protect yourself from harm. Get active and physical, and remember to concentrate. If you followed all of these prescriptions, you might find you hit an incredible productive peak. There are the basic things you keep in mind when designing a machine. How to get it to run like a freight train and not immediately destroy itself. You've got to be a high wattage generator, and that requires careful design, lubrication, and cooling. as well as churning out the juice. That night, the moon opposes Saturn while she applies to Alhena. We must balance our needs and restrictions, structure and nourishment. This can be serious, but get control of your moods and don't overindulge in negative emotions. We can be looking at grave situations, but we must not over-sacrifice personal needs for the needs of the system, even when it helps other players. This is not a Hollywood movie. In real life, we are called to heroism at times, but if we are going to survive every pass the moon makes through Capricorn for the next 3 months, never mind the next 3 years, we must teach ourselves to not run into every burning building after the baby or collapsing castle to pull out the princess. This is serious. Keep your heart in one hand and your head in the other, but most importantly, keep your feet firmly planted on the ground, even if you've got to step and pivot to avoid the arrows and the javelins. Okay, welcome back to Liminal Light. Bonnie.
Good afternoon.
And we also want to welcome back, once again, our resident herbalist, Suzanne Stone.
Hello. Nice to be back.
Yeah, good to have you back again.
Thanks.
All your herbal correspondences for all the forecasts have been brilliant.
Great. I'm glad they're fitting.
Yeah, they're really cool to read. I'll read them. I'll go through them one go when you send them, and then it's just kind of abstract. I'm in production mode, and then as the days go, I'll look back into them, and then they're so valuable. It's really great to like pull, because you can get some of these aspects. Even I'm always looking at them and writing about them and thinking about them and planning around them, but still sometimes I'm like, what is going on right now? And I'll have to look at my own writing, and then I'm like, oh, and then I'll look at your correspondences to like see if I can help get myself through it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's good. I actually find myself doing that too. I'm like, oh, what did I write? I've got to go back and look. Oh yeah, okay, I'm going to try that.
Yeah, it's not just like because you've thought of it once that it's like locked in.
Well,
you know?
it's because
Right.
we're always thinking about the next week.
Yeah, totally.
And so it's difficult to think
Yeah.
about the present.
Yeah,
Right. So,
yeah, and so
yeah.
go ahead, Bonnie.
Yeah, it's been enjoyable.
Yeah, so right now, thinking about the next week, it's clear that this is a big one. Not only by the end do we get the Mercury retrograde, but in about halfway through, we get spring equinox and the Astrological New Year on March 20th.
Very exciting.
Which is really interesting. That I pulled up the chart for that, and we have I'm looking at the wrong one here. That's just after the Venus Mercury conjunction, because Mercury's slowing down for retrograde and Venus was catching up and then gets past him. And so this, when you look at the what they call the Aries Ingress chart, and that's, since it's the tropical zodiac, when the sun enters Aries, it's spring equinox, and the sun enters Libra, it's autumn equinox. And so when you get this spring equinox chart, that's Astrological New Year, and then that's your the chart to look at the overarching concepts for the year and look at signatures within there. And I did the same thing with January 1st, 2018, even though that's kind of an arbitrary date. It's like the grid, the calendar, the grid superimposed over, but it's still, as far as like the project that the world calls 2018 is like, that's the inception of that project, So both charts have value to look at, be like, what's this period about, even though they're off from each other by a couple months. And in both cases, we get a very dignified Saturn, Saturn being in Capricorn for a few years now. But both times we get, in the 2018 New Year chart, we get the moon almost exactly opposite Saturn in Cancer, so the moon's in rulership, and Saturn in Capricorn is trying to do with like structure and foundation and all of this, like big, powerful foundational structures in society and the earth itself and the laws of nature. And then the moon is saying like, oh, but we have needs of nourishment, we have needs of safety, we have personal needs and emotional needs, and trying to put those two things in balance. And then we get the moon in the Aries Ingress chart, we get the moon exalted in Taurus, in a very tight trine with Saturn and Capricorn. And so now the moon is saying, okay, and then Mars is also in Capricorn now too. So this is where you get Mars, Saturn, and Pluto all in Capricorn. So it's like everyone's saying like, big power moves, like this business being dissolved that turns into this business, and these governments consolidating and things like this,
Yeah.
And the moon is saying like, okay, but we got to go at a natural pace. We got to go at an organic rhythm. We have to attend to the needs of fecundity. And so in both cases, it's really like seeing, it's like the archetypal mother and the archetypal father are both in the driver's seat, like, or sharing the driver's seat, like making decisions together. Be like, okay, we got to protect ourselves and our culture and our youth, but we got to but these people that still need to make atrocious amounts of money, they're not going to stop, so they still need to do that, and the power needs to change hands, but the earth needs some things, and we need to fix some things. So it's really interesting, and I think it's quite fortunate to have the moon aspecting Saturn in this way, and it's not just like the moon's over there in detriment, just getting like starved and wasted during she's speaking during this period.
That kind of reminds me of that story I was telling you about with what is that article? Michelle Manafee wrote an article titled "Why Media's Investment in Women Will Pay Off. Diversification isn't just the thing to do; it's also smart business." In which she references that Male Glance article that we talked about last week by Lily Loofburu. But Manafee is talking about how news and the media is making efforts to diversify their teams, specifically with women of color, not just women, because I think it's 39% of news outlets are do have women in it, but now we need to go a little bit further than that. We need to actually go a lot further than that, and it's not just because it's the right thing to do. It's because that attracts those women. There's high numbers there's high numbers that will watch this, and there's high numbers that will be buying things that the advertisers are who are attracted to.
Yeah, you said
this.
Women have buying power in the market. That's noticeable from like I was just saying, the people making atrocious amounts of money still need to make that money, but we need to,
it says that women control over $20 trillion in worldwide spending, and then in the U.S. the purchase power ranges from 5 to 15 trillion annually, and they go on to say that lest you think that all of the spending falls into the traditionally female, in quotes, domains such as household, fashion, and beauty, note that women purchase over 50% of what are considered traditionally male products, including automobiles, home improvement products, and consumer electronics. So I think that this story really encompasses what you're
really
talking about.
That,
It's
right. It's also interesting because traditionally women, in many traditional cultures, women have been like not the hunter, but the gatherers, that provide, bringing things forth. And so that spending for all of those different aspects is really almost ingrained, I feel like sometimes, not always. Nothing's ever
for sure.
always.
It's certainly a signature of Cancer. People have a lot of Cancer stuff, tend to hoard things and buy a lot of stuff. Wait, go ahead, Suzanne. Did you have more to say?
Oh no, I was just saying that I've been thinking about that. I think about that sometimes, just with why is it a generality that women love to shop?
Yeah,
And it's just okay, well, I think it kind of goes deep to wanting to provide and wanting to have what is needed.
Yeah, totally. And that's that lunar nature for sure. Yeah. The other part of it, the other component is that having Venus in detriment for the chart, because, Venus and
Aries.
Yeah, Venus and Aries, like Venus and Mercury are going to only go a certain distance away from the sun. They just go back and forth over the sun, and Venus can get further away. But so you'll often see them in the Aries Ingress chart. They're going to be close by. You might get Venus further along, and you might get Mercury behind, or vice versa. But so it's not like amazing that they're in Aries, but they're in Aries. But Venus is in Aries in detriment in the chart, and squaring Saturn. She's 10 degrees moved along, but Venus and Mercury are conjunct, and so you have Mercury stationing to turn retrograde. So it's a lot of Mercury. It's a slow Mercury, and she's just past him. And so that Venus-Mercury combination, you'll get a lot of art, always art, because it's like the logic of beauty, the logic of aesthetic, and the logic of pleasure. So you'll always get artistic expression, but it's being Aries, it's going to be like about the individual expression. And so you're going to get Venusian voices, which right away we can think of that as like female voices, and that goes along with what Bonnie's saying, is like more female voices in the media. And then we looked at a couple other stories. One is Instagram banning photos and videos of women giving birth and in labor when they're considered graphic. And there's a nurse in LA, Katie Vigos, who started the project called the Empowered Birth Project to teach about childbirth, and to be like, this is totally, everyone should know about this, everyone should be able to see this. And then Instagram says, well, we have a hard rule against showing genitalia, and that includes this, but it puts it in the category with like pornography and like hate speech and things like that. The list of things that it's like in, and then it's like, and no childbirth either. And I'm sure there's other examples of something that probably is great that can't be included in that list, but this is a pretty blaringly obvious one. It's something that you could probably show on like public television that you can't show on Instagram. So that's pretty obvious. Other example of like, and it's Aries. It's like Aries is all about like, it's Astrological New Year. It's like the birthing out of the Piscean period, and it's like Aries is like the bloody fight for individuation. And it's like.
Didn't you say it's also related to the head?
Yeah, and it's related to the head. Yeah, so it's like a bloody head coming out of like the womb, and like people screaming and like anguish and torment, and then, but then it turns out great, usually.
Ideally.
Yeah, and so that's another interesting story as far as that. But the whole Aries Ingress thing is really amazing. I was thinking a lot about it in terms of Lent, and people doing Lent and Lent purifications and fasts and abstinence. And the word Lent comes from Old English Langton, which just means spring. And so this purification period's going on that is like the day after Carnival, and it goes to Easter and to Ascension and such. And thinking about like what the point of that purification period is, and I was thinking about like there's evidence, at least in magical traditions, for like in the Greek magical papyri, there's the spell for all purposes, or consecration for all purposes, which is like where you consecrate an item, a ring or a phylactery or something like that, under Helios, and you call to like all the different faces of Helios, which are the different hours from sunset to sunrise, and they each have a Greek name and an animal, like a hieroglyphic and an animal associated with them, and you say a prayer to each. And it's some people perform it now as it lasting that long. It's like an all-day ritual, and then I looked for it's you could. It doesn't say, there's no ritual form attached to it. It doesn't say when to do it in the PGM, But I looked in the Picatrix and was looking for the Sun and Aries stuff, like the Sun and Exaltation. And the only thing I found explicitly was the making of a solar ointment in the section where they're making confections and ointments. And it follows a similar template. You speak to like 7 different prayers to seven different angels or spirits of the sun, and then you repeat all those prayers 12 times. And so it follows a really similar form. So then you're thinking if people are doing this around the Aries Ingress, around the Sun Ingress into Aries, and this is a big deal, this starts the astrological year, at least in contemporary tradition, the way we look at it now. Leading up to that, you have Lent and this purification process, and that's the time where it's Pisces season, and the Latin word for Lent is the Quadragesima, which just means 40, and because it's the 40 days of Lent, but then you have the 40 days and nights of the deluge, of the flood, and so that's like mirrors that, and that's like the Piscean deluge, and that's a time period where in Pisces, one of the things that happens is everything mixes. It's really easy for things to become contaminated, and so I know in like Kimbanda, in Brazilian traditions of Kimbanda, what they call quiumbas, which would have been called like larvae in Greco-Roman, Greco-Egyptian traditions, which was where we get the word larva, because it's like the spirit that's within the husk, that you always, when you're leaving a working or leaving a ritual, you have to be careful of them being attached to you, like negative spirits that are still attached to you, and that's where you get some of like throwing the salt over your shoulder, because they say that they'll like spirits like that will literally hold onto your neck and your liver and your kidneys, like they're literally like attached to your back, and if you ever put salt on like a slug or something like that, you're like salting them from behind you, and so that so in Kimbanda they don't, some of these Brazilian, some of the lines or houses of Kimbanda don't do any workings after the after Carnival until after the Passion. So it's basically like during Lent, during Pisces season, when you should be purifying in preparation for this big Helios consecration, or making these like solar phylacteries at the beginning of spring, where also in Catholic traditions, it's a time during Lent, especially during Embertide, to plan your Mary garden,
Oh, yeah.
And and get ready for that rebirth. And in the Golden Bough, you see all these mostly northern and Western European traditions of like making a puppet of death and bringing that out of the house and out of the village, and say we're marching death out of the village or out of the home, and then either destroying it or drowning it, or like plunging it into water or whatever, and then people who brought it's usually children, would cut down a tree and then put the clothing that was on the puppet of death and bring it back into the village, and when they come in they say we're bringing life, so it's an interesting whole mix of things that happen right around here. And in the Catholic tradition they say it's the 4th Sunday of Lent, which falls right around Astrological New Year. And I don't know, just something I've been meditating on. I thought it was really interesting to in this transition period, going from this like really like mixy, everything can get contaminated, like you could get like, it's a time to, I found in my personal practice I had to do more smudging than usual, more like more baths than usual, ritual baths than usual. And I was like, oh, this is like Pisces. And then I was like, oh wait, and I put all the pieces kind of together in my mind, and I was like, oh, this makes so much sense.
Yeah, all those waters, I mean, it's just, you have to be careful also what vessel you're putting in. It will fill whatever vessel you're putting it in.
Yeah, it'll take whatever shape because it's watery. So, have you thought about what kind of herbs to call upon for the Aries Ingress?
Well, for this time period, I was thinking also of like the it being a whole year astrological forecast as well. So I was thinking about people who are not already calling upon adaptogens to learn about adaptogens, which are herbs or natural substances that assist us with dealing with the inevitable stress in our lives. And I mean, obviously we need stress in our lives. As Susan Weed says, a bridge cannot even hold up without stress. You know, we need that tension. We need the stress to make us move, to make it challenge us, to make us move. But we need to know how to maneuver in that with strength. So I'm sure people know a lot about adaptogens, but for example, ashwagandha is a really wonderful adaptogen, holy basil, American ginseng. You have to be a little careful with that because that's been over-harvested. You really want to get that from a source, or someone who's actually growing it. Rhodiola, and you really have to, you know, some people think, oh, I need an adaptogen, I'll just choose this. You really have to kind of do your research and realize that some are immunomodulating, some are actually like balancing, will actually bring an overactive person to balance, and then it'll bring an underactive person up into balance. But then there's also immunostimulating ones, like astragalus and schisandra, which stimulate the immune system, but they're not necessarily going to be calming. They're not necessarily like I call upon astragalus, but if I'm sick, I do not call upon astragalus because it's such an amazing warrior that it's made this wall that the sickness is going to stay in and not able to get out.
Wow. That's interesting.
So, I mean, I know it's a little bit vague, but I just think people need to do their own research because constitutions are different. I mean, ashwagandha is an amazing one. It's one of a lot of adaptogens are stimulating, but ashwagandha is actually calming, has a lot of iron in it, and really helps us find that balance.
Yeah, it's really interesting with the everything going into Aries. Just the little bit of advice I'd be writing into forecasts, like, you know, you might want to, you know, raise your personal fire for this, but maybe you're too hot, so maybe you don't want to do that. You want to cool it down,
right?
You know, like, and that Aries having so much to do with the individual in general, and then immediately being like, okay, well, during this time, you pretty much have to just like start, like you said, doing your own research and looking into yourself and being like, okay, what am I? Who am I? How am I composed? I mean, and that's a great thing to do to start off the year, you know? Yeah,
exactly. I mean, and you were even talking in your forecast how those questions are really being demanded of us right now.
Yeah, totally.
If we don't face them, they're going to be facing us.
Yeah, and that's especially going to come in with the Mercury retrograde.
Right.
Suzanne, you have a class coming up that you'll be teaching? You have enrollment now?
Yeah, I have enrollment up for my Moon of Hyldemoer hands-on herbal medicine making class. It goes from May through September. It's pretty intensive. We meet 13 times, and we make medicine every week. Do plant spirit medicine, and we focus on meeting the plants. Everyone has an herbal ally. Yeah, it's an enjoyable class for sure. I've had a few people sign up already, so it's great.
That's so great.
Should they go to your website?
Yes, definitely.
And
moonofhyldemoer.com.
Cool. Well, we'll put that in the notes.
In the notes, for sure.
Yeah, this like asking yourself these questions and figuring out your composition and who you are and really what your logic is and what your sovereignty is really comes up with this Mercury turning retrograde. And Mercury's not retrograde yet in the Aries Ingress chart, but he's slowing down to turn around, so it's a lot of like that moment where you are still moving forward, but you start to be like I was saying to Bonnie earlier, where you start to be like, you know, you go to pay for dinner and you're like, oh, all right, like pay up, and then you're like, where's my wallet? I don't have my wallet. And then you're like, well, where did we go last? And then you're like, well, we went to the library. So you go back there, and then you're like, okay, well, it's not there. I guess we have to go to the hotel. And then you're like, did you find a wallet? You know, and like start backtracking. once you're in the shadow of retrograde, you're already kind of losing stuff and dropping stuff without realizing it, and you'll have to go back. But it's like really just forcing you to like kind of rethink your logic about, in Aries at least, like who you are, how you express yourself, what your personal language is, like, you know, all of that stuff. And then that was coming up in our investigations when we were looking into the H&M thing.
Oh yeah. H&M is facing backlash once again after it denied a cease and desist letter from graffiti artist Jason Williams, who writes Revoke, for the use of his art in an ad. He, of course, was upset because they used it without permission, but also people seeing the art would assume that he was working with H&M.
Right.
And their opinion is that it's graffiti, it's illegal, and therefore any kind of copyright that he thinks he has to it, or any artist thinks that they have to it, is null and void. And so now they're taking it to court, and so H&M is once again being boycotted.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just funny, the gist of it, you know, is that like it's literally a signature, you know, like a lot of street art and accompanies like graffiti and you know, straight graffiti in general, just literally almost being like a signature, you know, like this is me, my individual like woo woo woo, you know, and then like and then this like conglomerate company thing saying like, well, you know, if you're not registered as like, if you don't register your taxes as an artist and have everything trademarked, then it's just like we're going to be a big vacuum cleaner and suck in everything that's not accounted for. You know, like we basically can own the entire like people's entire physical existence on the street. You know,
yeah, that's insane.
We can own the image of reality as we know it and use it for advertising, and we're gonna get the rights to reality before someone else does or something, you know, which is totally mad. But you see that in the Aries Ingress chart. You see like I was saying, those big power moves and people's needs. And then you get Venus and Mercury in Aries, and Aries like can be angry, but it's also like assertive, and it's like we said, the bloody battle to individuate yourself, and because of that, it's like art, you know, so it's like street art, you know, it's like the Venus and Mercury individual expression. And then I noticed in the Guardian in England, there's like another story involving street art where the work of Ryan Callahan, a street artist who goes under the name of Ryca, RYCA, has an exhibition at St. Stephen Walbrook Church. It's a Stations of the Cross exhibition where he put like a Star Wars stormtrooper on a crucifix, and people asked him to remove it, but since Europe is barely religious anymore, they just had him move it to a different part of the building.
Yeah, it started off as like the centerpiece of the whole thing, and then people got upset and they moved it to like a more discreet place. I think that's hilarious. Yeah, they were gonna like take it down completely, but then like the reverend in the church supported it. He was like, well, you know, people, you know, Christians need to like look at modern themes and like be challenged by mixing modernity with Christianity. But it's just, you know, it's like a Star Wars figure on the cross, you know. It's like look it up.
Yeah, look it up. Yeah,
if you care.
Yeah, so it's just funny, and that happened on what did? Well, I noticed the article. It was the 13th of March, which, you know, is like right when we had the Saturn Venus square, and also had the Jupiter Sun trine last week, which was pretty strong signature. That's also the day we had or on the 14th, the following day, where those aspects were still, they had perfected, but they were still separating, was when there was the mass walkout of students.
Oh, yeah.
Who were protesting for
gun safety.
Gun safety laws. And that chart is pretty amazing. If I looked at that moment, because it's the first one started at 10 a.m. on the East Coast of the U.S.
Yeah.
And yeah, you have so that puts Venus in the 12th house and Saturn in the 9th house. So you have Saturn in Capricorn, like Capricorn's like the systems and the laws, you know, the structure, squaring against intention with like Venus and Mercury in the 12th house, which is like the house of hidden enemies, you know, like violent hidden enemies.
Well,
and you have Saturn on the degree of Phases, the star, which is the star that's the eye of the archer. And so since antiquity, it's been about like looking down, staring at someone, pointing a lethal projectile weapon at them. You know, it's literally like, we interpret it now as like looking down the barrel of a gun, and like the tension is like, who, you know, which direction is the gun pointed? You know, like, are you aiming the gun, or are you working under the gun? You know, and then the other aspect of the chart is we have like Jupiter in the 7th house, which is in the house of relationships, trining the sun in harmony in Pisces, which is like all become one in Pisces, in the 11th house of like the social house. So it's like this social issue where all can become one and approach this and try to like approach this, like this trauma and this like this tension between hidden enemies and like the structure of education. So it's so overt. It was crazy. You know, when I've looked at it, I wouldn't look at it and be like, oh, there's going to be a major school walkout protesting gun control on this day, like 2 years ago, looking at the chart. But looking at it now, you're like, oh yeah, that is all there.
Amazing.
I think I noticed with this Venus and Aries, another manifestation of that is, this has been going on for a while too, but models are speaking out about poor treatment. I read an article by, what is this woman? Jennifer Skye, who was a former model, and she was just talking about the exploitation of models by the modeling companies and how things need to change. And earlier in the month, I had read an article by another former model who she was celebrated for being able to fit into Alexander McQueen sample size, and she was living on 3 apples a day, which of course is not enough food for anybody to live off of. But she was apparently one of the lucky ones as models are concerned, because she was making decent money. But there's so many people who are just ready to exploit these young women who dream of being part of something great, which the fashion world seems great from the outside, and it seems like more and more the fashion world is being called out for not being great and for not being fair and not taking into account the people who, or everybody who's working towards it. So I think it's exciting that models are finally bringing up these concerns, and people are listening to it. I'm sure that they've had these concerns forever. I read about the history of models in this article by Jennifer Skye, and she said that that in the 1600s, the newest fashions were exhibited on dolls called Pandoras. These figures were revered and treated with the utmost respect. When live models became the norm, the women were expected to live in-house for very little money and were degradingly referred to as mannequins. They were required to wear a full-body black satin sheath called a furreau, because the couture clients would not buy garments that had such low-class bodies. Wow. Isn't that insane?
But I love that the dolls received the utmost respect.
Oh, they did. They were like, they would have, entourages to bring them to these places, where they would just send the poor model, through the streets in rags until,
or like you said, like in modern times, like unchaperoned across Tokyo at 15 years old, not knowing the language.
Yeah, she's from the swamps of Florida. That's what she said. Yeah. She has never been anywhere, and now she's in Tokyo, and she doesn't speak the language nor read the language, and she really, and she complained to the head of the trip that she had been mistreated on the subways, and they said, that's not really, that's not a problem, don't worry about it.
To the firm, like the modeling firm.
Mm-hmm. And so she stopped taking the subway and ended up leaving Japan in debt to the company. So
yeah,
that's got to stop.
Yeah, so it's all this more examples of women asserting voices and their roles. You'll see that in the Aries Ingress chart, and because of the proximity of Mercury, like they're being spoken, and then and also just like that Mercury is turning around for retrograde. We're getting a lot of this kind of like being like, oh, what exactly was the question that was asked? Does this make sense? And a lot of like everyone calling everyone else out on these different things. Like there's one layer of it that's very positive and another layer where there's a lot of overreaction. It seems like a necessary overreaction because it's like beginning a conversation, but in a way it's like the end of a conversation, being like, okay, we can never go back to racism. We can never go back to patriarchy. We can never, like this is like, let's just, we're spiking this down now. We're like Marsing, severing the past and the future. And so there's the positive layer, but then there's people just where there's like, I feel like looking at the chart, this next phase being like this Mercury, very strong, but getting ready to turn around from where Venus is at, is going to be like, okay, let's go back to the degree that I was at before I turned around and just look at all the stuff we missed. It's like when you're done writing a document, you go back to the top and you reread it and re-edit everything. And all those problems that come up while Mercury's in retrograde is stuff that Mercury found along the way and was like, oh, guess what? Your car wasn't fixed. The mechanic replaced the wrong part and it's still broken, so now you have to bring it back. And you're like, oh my God, that's so annoying that Mercury retrograde. But really, Mercury's finding things that need to be
that you thought were addressed, weren't addressed.
And so there's going to be a signature of that across the year. It's not as extreme as Mercury actually being in retrograde in the chart, but this kind of starting to stop and be like, wait a minute, it's both the expression and the kind of saying it, and then kind of looking at it and thinking about it for a second, being like, it's like the impulsive blurting stuff out and the immediate moment after where you're like, oh my God, I can't believe I just said that. And then maybe you don't apologize necessarily, but your head is already running really fast thinking about like the repercussions of what was just said.
Yeah, I like you had written, it's a good time to search into the deep materiality and to find interpersonal fire and spirit, to look below and inward, to find yang mojo you might have had once and have lost, also to find in manifest reality lost personal items, and to find links back to personal sovereignty, etc., etc.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, finding like your like the sovereignty and the yang mojo you lost. Like you were like, yeah, I used to be a rock star. Like, I used to be on top.
Literally.
Like, yeah. You're like, what happened? And then trying to figure out where that is, and what to do with it. And even if that doesn't feel like your predicament, you're like, you're like typically like you're like, oh, I got plenty of yang mojo, no problem here.
Yeah.
You might still want to kind of be like, well, just look, where is it? Like, what kind of situation is it in? Like, what kind of situation should it be in, or can it be in? How can I individuate myself further? And of course, we'll get beyond Aries season, and that individuation is no longer as much of the issue, but it's a good time to like sort your stuff before you go into the next phase.
Yeah, editing. It's editing of the
self-editing.
Self.
Yeah.
Kind of, I always love like thinking about people who say, or even myself, I don't like this, I don't do this. And then thinking about those things, is that true? Like, does that still hold true? Why isn't it? Why? Or I do love this, this is what I do. Just assessing these things that are so automatic.
Yeah, certainly. And that makes a lot of sense for this whole year too, not just this upcoming retrograde, but
life in general,
but that Mercury is conjunct Venus, and Venus is like your tastes and your values, and in Aries it's like your very personal individual tastes, and just kind of being like looking at that and being like, do those still make sense?
Absolutely.
And talking about looking for things that are lost. It seems that we've lost Suzanne. We lost connection at some point, so I think we're going to go and look for her.
Mm-hmm.
And
we're going to go back in time.
Yeah, we're going to go back in time.
But this will be recorded. This will be presented in the future.
Right. Yeah. And then by the time next week comes around, you'll be listening to our voices, and we'll actually be
have backwards heads.
See you then. Thank you for listening to Liminal Light. Our theme music was composed by the ever-talented Asa Irons. Our all-too-brief guest before we lost connection in the shadow of Retrograde was Suzanne Stone of Moon of Hyldemoer Herbals. The background sound was by Charles Allin. I'm your host, Chrissy Puchere Rapucci, and you can find me at atavisceral.com. atavisceral.com, where I post articles and forecasts, offer chart readings, talismanic concoctions, occult services, tarot, divination, and more.